The first thing I noticed about her was the way she was carrying that water jug. Not with her hands, with her whole back, spine straight, neck long, like she was daring the world to look at her and say something about it. 2 miles from the well to the edge of town, and she walked it like it was a Sunday morning stroll, barefoot, on red dirt that burned the bottoms off, lesser men's boots. I pulled my horse up. I didn't mean to stare. I'd been riding since before sunup, trying to get to Red Rock Station before the afternoon heat turned the trail into something closer to the surface of the sun. I had a contract waiting on me there. 3 months of fence work on the Dawson spread, steady pay, steady meals. First real work I'd had since February. But I pulled my horse up. She didn't look at me, that was the thing. Most people, when a stranger stops on the road, they look up. She didn't, she just kept walking. Like I was a piece of weather she'd already decided wasn't her problem. I rode slow beside her for a few seconds, longer than I should have. And then I said the most useless thing a man can say to a woman in the middle of the Arizona desert in July. "That looks heavy, ma'am." She stopped. She set the jug down in one smooth movement like she'd done it 10,000 times, and she looked at me for the first time. Her eyes were very dark and very still, and she looked at me the way a doctor looks at a wound. Not unkind, just assessing. "It is heavy," she said. "It always is." And then she picked it back up and kept walking. I don't know what made me get off the horse. Some kind of stupidity, probably. I got down, looped the reins over my saddle horn so Biscuit could follow behind, and I fell into step beside her. Didn't offer to take the jug. Instinct told me that would go over about as well as offering to carry a hawk. We walked a quarter mile before either of us said anything. Her name was Suna. She told me that like it was information she was releasing under mild protest, not a gift. She lived on the edge of the San Marcos township with her grandmother, who was old and couldn't walk much anymore, and she made the water run every other day. "You're Apache," I said. Not a question. "Yes," she said. Same tone you'd use to say the sky is blue. "I'm Cole," I said. She didn't say nice to meet you. She said, "Where are you going?" "Red Rock." "That's north," she said. "Yes, ma'am. You're walking south." I looked up and realized she was right. I had completely turned myself around without noticing. I stopped walking. She kept going. I stood there on the road like a man who'd just been gently and efficiently relieved of something he didn't know he was carrying. I went north. I took the Dawson job. I was gone 3 months. I thought about her maybe twice a week, which for me and a woman I'd known for 15 minutes on a dirt road was once or twice more than I expected. There was something about the quality of her stillness that stuck in me like a splinter. Not painful, just present, reminding me it was there every time I moved a certain way. When the Dawson job ended, I rode back through San Marcos. I told myself it was because the road went through there anyway. The road did go through there anyway. I'm not sure either of those things is the real reason. I found her at the market, not shopping, selling. She had a blanket on the ground, and on it she'd laid out dried herbs in neat bundles, tied with red thread, and some small clay pots she'd made herself, glazed in a way I'd never seen before. Deep rust red with thin, white lines running through them like rivers on a map. The market was busy. People walked past her blanket without stopping. A woman with 2 children in tow stepped over the corner of it without looking down. Suna sat cross-legged on the ground behind her goods, with her hands in her lap and her face perfectly composed, and I got the feeling she'd been sitting like that, unseen, for a very long time. I crouched down and picked up one of the little clay pots. It was heavier than it looked. The glaze caught the light in a way that made it look almost alive. "Did you make this?" I said. She looked at me for a moment, like she was deciding whether she recognized me. "You walked south," she said. Something in my chest did something it had no business doing. "I went north eventually." "Eventually," she said. There was something dry in it that wasn't quite a smile but was in the same neighborhood. "I bought 2 of the pots. I had nowhere to put them. I lived out of a bedroll and a saddlebag and had for 6 years, but I bought them." She wrapped them carefully in dried grass and handed them to me without ceremony. "Are you staying in town?" she asked. "Few days, maybe. Depends on if there's work." She nodded, like she was filing that away somewhere. "There's work at the Creighton place, out toward the creek. They've been short-handed since April." She knew the country. She knew who needed help and where. She said it matter-of-factly, like passing along information was a perfectly natural thing to do for a man you'd met once, 6 months ago, on a dirt road going the wrong direction. I got up. I tucked the wrapped pots under my arm. "Thank you," I said. "Don't break them," she said. I worked the Creighton place for 6 weeks. I saw her maybe once a week, usually at the market, sometimes on the road. We'd nod. Sometimes we'd talk, about the weather coming in, about the creek running low, about her grandmother's health, which was declining in small, steady increments that she described with a precision that must have cost her something. I didn't ask too many questions. That was the thing I figured out early. She didn't mind conversation, but she minded questions that had pity in them. She could hear pity in a question the way a horse hears a rattlesnake. Her whole body would go very still, and then the conversation was over. So I didn't pity her. I just listened. And slowly, the way you come to know a landscape by walking it over and over, I started to understand the shape of her life. She had grown up on the reservation until she was 12. When her parents died in a winter that had been particularly cruel, her grandmother had brought her to San Marcos because there was more work there, more trade, more chance. The chance had been modest, but real. Her grandmother had taught her the herbs, the clay work, the old prayers. She'd also taught her English, which she spoke better than half the Anglo men in town, though none of them ever seemed to notice. She had no husband. She'd had one, briefly, years ago. A man from the reservation who had gone east looking for work and not come back. She said this without anger, which told me the anger had burned itself out a long time ago and left something harder behind. She had no children, no family except the grandmother. In San Marcos, she was mostly tolerated. That's the word that kept occurring to me, tolerated. People bought her herbs when they needed them and her pots occasionally, and they didn't run her off. But they didn't see her either. She was a presence at the edge of things. Like the mountains you stop noticing after the first week because they're always there. The day everything changed between us. If I had to pick one day, it was a Sunday in September. I'd finished at the Creighton place. I had money in my pocket and no particular plan, and I rode out to the well on the edge of town because I needed water, and if I'm honest, because I'd started measuring my week by whether I'd seen her or not. She was there at the well. She wasn't drawing water. She was sitting on the stone lip of it with her hands loose in her lap and her face turned up to the sky. Not praying, I didn't think. Just sitting. Being in the moment the way only people who've had a lot of hard ones learn to be. Her grandmother had died. I didn't know that yet. I found out later. I just knew something was different in the set of her shoulders. They were down. Not in the way of relaxation, but in the way of exhaustion so deep it had finally stopped fighting itself. I tied Biscuit to the post and sat down next to her on the stone lip. Left a foot of space between us. She didn't look at me. I didn't say anything. We just sat there in the September sun and listened to the dry wind come off the flats. After a long time she said, very quietly, "My grandmother is gone." "I'm sorry," I said. She nodded once. A small, composed nod. But I noticed her hands, which were usually so still, were gripping the stone on either side of her, the knuckles showing through. I didn't say anything else. There wasn't anything else to say. I just stayed there. An hour, maybe more. The sun moved. The shadow from the post moved. She didn't cry, not that I saw. She just sat and I sat beside her and, somewhere in that hour, so gradually that I couldn't have said when it happened, she stopped gripping the stone and her hands went still. When she stood up to go, I stood up too. "I'll walk you home," I said. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "All right." We walked. I led Biscuit by the reins. We didn't talk much. When we got to her place, a small adobe, neat and clean, a vegetable garden along the south wall, she stopped at the gate. "Thank you," she said. "For staying." I didn't do anything. "You didn't leave," she said. "That's not nothing." She went inside. I stood at the gate with my horse for a minute, listening to the wind. Then I rode back to the rooming house I was staying in and lay on the narrow bed staring at the ceiling for a long time, with a feeling in my chest like something large trying to rearrange itself. 3 days later, she came to find me. I was at the livery, brushing Biscuit down when I heard her step behind me. I knew it was her before I turned around. I can't explain how I knew. The weight of it, maybe. The particular quality of her presence. She was standing in the livery door with the afternoon light behind her, and she had a look on her face I'd never seen before. Not the composure. Something else underneath the composure. Something raw and careful at the same time. "I need to talk to you," she said. "All right." She came in and stood a few feet away, and she folded her hands in front of her in that deliberate way she had, like she was holding herself together by an act of will. "I don't have family," I said. "I have no one to speak for me, no one to help me through the winter or the one after. I have the house and the garden and the trade work, but it isn't enough, not by itself. I know this town. I know what it thinks of me. No one here is going to offer." She stopped, pressed her lips together, started again. "No one wants me. That's the truth of it, and I've known it for long enough that it doesn't hurt the way it used to. but I am saying it plainly so you understand my situation. She looked at me very directly. Dark, still eyes. I need a husband, she said. I am not asking for love or for any feeling you don't have. I'm asking for a practical arrangement. You work hard. You're honest. You don't look at me the way most men here do, like I'm a thing they need to manage or ignore. I have watched you for months and I have thought about this carefully and I am asking you. Her voice went very slightly uneven on that last part and she steadied it. I am asking if you would consider it. The livery was quiet. Biscuit shifted his weight. Somewhere outside a door banged in the wind. I put down the brush. Suna, I said. She waited. Her face was very still and I understood then what it cost to stand there like that, to hold yourself that straight, while you offered what might be refused. You said no one wants you, I said. Yes. That's not true. She went very still, a different kind of still from her usual stillness. I've been trying, I said, to find a reason to stay in San Marcos for 3 months. The Creighton job ended 2 weeks ago. There's no reason for me to be here, except that I keep finding ways to be here, because I'm not ready to ride somewhere that doesn't have you in it. Her hands, folded in front of her, tightened slightly on each other. I'm not interested in a practical arrangement, I said. I'm interested in you, the actual you. The woman who walks 2 miles with a water jug like she's carrying a crown. Who knows every herb in this county and what it's for. Who sat at a well for an hour and didn't fall apart and didn't pretend she was fine either. That's who I want. If you want me, the whole thing. Not an arrangement. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, so quietly I almost didn't hear it, I haven't let myself want anything in a long time. I know, I said. I'm not asking you to decide right now. I'm just asking you to know that it's there, the possibility. She looked at me. I looked at her. The September light came through the livery door and fell across the packed dirt floor between us. One last chance, she said, almost to herself. You're asking me to believe in one more chance. I'm not asking you to believe in anything, I said. I'm just standing here, same as at the well. Something in her face shifted, not much, just slightly. Like a door opening a crack, she nodded. All right, she said. Stay, I stayed. We got married in November in the courthouse. Just the clerk and a woman from the boarding house, who'd known Suna for years and wept through the whole thing, which surprised us both. It wasn't much of a ceremony. But I remember the way she looked in the morning light coming through the courthouse window, and I remember thinking, this is the realest thing I have ever done. We lived in her grandmother's house. I fixed the roof before the winter rains. She showed me how to tend the garden, not like I needed showing. I'd done farm work, but there was something about the way she moved through it, knowing each plant by name, by temperament, that I wanted to learn. So I learned. The winter was hard. It always is in that country. We lost most of the garden to a hard frost in February, and there were weeks when we were careful with money, in ways that made careful feel like an understatement. But there was something about being careful together that was different from being poor alone. Lighter. Like the weight of it was distributed properly for the first time. She didn't stop being still. That was never going to change, and I didn't want it to. But I started to see what lived inside the stillness. A kind of humor that only showed up when she was comfortable, very dry and very precise, that could make me laugh until my ribs hurt. A fierceness about injustice that she kept very controlled, but that I could see banked in there like coals. A tenderness with growing things, with the garden, with the birds that came to the edge of the property, with a cat that showed up one March morning and never left, that she mostly expressed through action, rather than words, but that was as clear as speech. She started teaching me Apache. I was a slow student. She was a patient teacher, mostly, though she occasionally gave me the look she'd given me on the road that first day. The assessing look, when I mispronounced the same word for the 4th time. Again, she'd say, "You're a harder teacher than any schoolmaster I had," I told her once. "I know," she said, without apology. Spring came, the garden came back. Her pots sold better than they had before, partly because I'd built her a small kiln that let her fire them more consistently. She expanded into larger pieces. Platters, water vessels, that took a week to make, and that she priced accordingly, which caused some argument in town. People had gotten used to her prices being low. She was done with that. I found steady fence work with 3 ranches, and put together a reputation as someone who'd do the job right the first time, which is all you need in that country, if you're willing to wait for the word to spread. We were not rich. We were not comfortable in the way the banker's family was comfortable. But we were stable in a way that neither of us had been in years, maybe ever. And there's a kind of freedom in stability that people who've always had it don't fully understand. The freedom of not having to spend every thought on survival. The space it opens up for other things. For us, sitting on the front step in the evenings watching the light go off the mountains. For her teaching me the names of things in her language. The plants, the stars, the different kinds of silence. For me telling her about the places I'd been, which she listened to with the focused attention of someone cataloging information she intends to use. "Would you go back?" she asked me once. We were on the step, the late summer dark coming in, the first stars showing up. Go back where? The traveling, the moving, before. I thought about it honestly because she always wanted honest. "No," I said. "I used to think I was free because I wasn't tied to anything, but that's not freedom, that's just floating. Having nowhere is the same as having nothing." She was quiet for a moment. "When I was a girl," she said, "my grandmother told me that the worst thing in the world is to be a woman with nowhere to put your love. She said it will turn inward. She said it will eat you alive." I looked at her. "Did it?" she considered. "Parts of me," she said carefully, "but not all of me." She was looking at the mountains, her hands loose in her lap. The evening wind moved her hair. "Not all," I agreed. She turned and looked at me, and something in her face was completely unguarded in a way I'd only seen a handful of times. Like she'd taken something down from a high shelf that she normally kept put away. "Cole," she said. "Yeah, I was wrong. About the arrangement." I waited. "What I wanted," she said. "When I came to find you at the livery, what I said was practical. It wasn't. I wanted to be wanted. I'd just talked myself into believing I couldn't ask for that. That it was too much." The wind came off the flats, warm and dry and carrying the smell of juniper. "It's not too much," I said. "No," she said. "I know that now." I put my arm around her, my hand at her shoulder, and she leaned into me, not dramatically, just leaned. The weight of her against my side, the warmth of her, solid and real and chosen. The mountains went dark. The stars came out one by one. She didn't fall apart, she never had. She just let me be there with her, which she'd worked hard to learn to do, and which I understood was the more important thing. We sat on that step until the night got cold. Then we went inside. There are men who will tell you love is something that happens to you like weather. Sudden and overwhelming and out of your control. I've heard that story. I've probably believed it at different points. But what I know now from the evidence of my own life is that the best love I ever saw was the kind that was built. That came from two people who were both, separately, a little bit broken, who'd both developed the habit of not hoping for too much, deciding slowly, carefully, stubbornly to hope for more. Suna didn't trust easily. I didn't either. We earned each other a season at a time. That first year, the second, the third, it accumulated. Every hard winter we got through together. Every evening on the step, every fight. And we had them. And they were real ones because she did not back down from anything. And neither did I. And we figured out how to come back from them. Her hand on my arm in the dark when I woke up restless. The way she'd leave dried lavender on the windowsill. Because she knew I liked the smell, and she'd never once said so out loud. Just done it. The cat had kittens. We kept two. She named them. She started teaching other women in town, the herbs, the clay work. There was resistance at first. There is always resistance. She outlasted it with the patience she'd been practicing since childhood, steady as water wearing down stone. I fixed the fence at 4 ranches, then 6. Then I had more work than I could do alone, and hired a boy from town, 17 and good with his hands, and spent a summer teaching him the way I'd been taught, which is to say thoroughly and without cutting corners. The town didn't stop being what it was. That's the truth. There were people in San Marcos who never looked at her like a person, and that was a weight she carried. And there were days it was heavier than others, and I couldn't carry it for her. I could only be there when she set it down. But there were also people, more than she'd had before, who came to her, who needed what she knew, who called her by name. It counts. It doesn't fix everything, but it counts. We had 10 good years in that house. Then her lungs started to give her trouble, the dry air, the dust, all those years of the hard country, and the doctor in San Marcos said, what we'd half already known, which is that the altitude wasn't helping. We moved, not far, south toward the river, where the air was heavier, and there was more green. I built us another house. She put in another garden. The first spring after we moved, she coaxed things out of that new ground that people said couldn't grow there, which was exactly the kind of thing she couldn't resist doing. The day she first flowers on the prickly pear she'd transplanted from the old place, a plant everyone had told her wouldn't survive the move. She came inside and her face was that unguarded way, the way I'd learned to love most. It bloomed, she said. I see that, I said. She sat down across from me at the kitchen table, and she looked at me and she laughed. Low and real and full, the way she laughed when she forgot to hold anything back. "I told them," she said. "You did," I said. She reached across the table and put her hand on mine. Her hand, which had carried so much, which had made things out of clay and earth and dried herbs, which had gripped the stone of that well on the worst day of her life, until her knuckles showed. "Resting now, easy." "Cole," she said. "Yeah, thank you," she said, "for not leaving." I turned my hand over under hers. I held it. "Suna," I said. There was never anywhere I would have rather been. Outside the window, the prickly pear bloomed orange and gold in the morning light. The cat, old now and slow, slept on the windowsill. The river moved somewhere behind the trees, steady and low and unhurried. She smiled at me across the table. The light came through. That was enough. That was everything. That was, I understood then, exactly what a life is supposed to be.